Something is wrong with the air inside the house. You cannot name it. You cannot point to it. It is just there, beneath the floorboards, behind the walls, folded into the silence between heartbeats. You are standing in a hallway that smells like old wood and something else, something older. The candles your partner lit 2 hours ago are still burning, but the flames are wrong. They are bending toward the far wall, all of them, at the same angle, as though something on the other side is breathing. You tell yourself it is a draft. You tell yourself a lot of things. The painting is gone from the wall. You only notice the empty hook now, the clean square of faded wallpaper where it hung for years before your mother decided it was ugly and took it down and threw it away. That was the moment. That was the exact moment. You just did not know it yet. You should have left this place the first night the walls began to bleed. His name was Ethan Calloway. He was 26 years old, working a mid-level accounting position at a firm in Columbus, Ohio, and sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with his mother, Margaret, in a part of the city where the rent had not changed since the mid-90s, and the laundromat downstairs played country music every Saturday morning without fail. It was not the life either of them had imagined. Margaret had grown up expecting better, not out of arrogance. She was the furthest thing from arrogant, but because for a brief, shining window of time in her late 20s, better had actually happened. Her husband, Gerald, had built a small but thriving real estate business in rural western Pennsylvania, near the edge of the Allegheny Forest. They had owned a house on the river, a real house, not rented, theirs. Then everything changed, and they never spoke about why. Gerald had been deteriorating for years by the time Ethan was old enough to understand what deteriorating meant. He moved slowly. He slept long hours. He flinched at sounds that were not there. Margaret had taken every job she could find, raised Ethan quietly, and never once explained to her son why the folder at the back of the filing cabinet, the one with the property deed inside, was something she refused to open. Ethan was the kind of young man who noticed things like that. He had his father's eyes and his mother's stubbornness, and on a Tuesday morning in late October, while searching the filing cabinet for his father's old insurance documents, he found the folder. He opened it. Inside were papers stained brown at the edges, not of age, with something else. He brought them to his mother. She went very still when she saw them, the kind of still that is not calm at all. Margaret did not yell. She did not cry immediately. She reached out and took the papers from Ethan's hands with both of hers, the way you take something dangerous from a child, carefully, deliberately, as though speed itself might trigger something. She set them on the kitchen counter and stood over them and said, very quietly, "I was going to burn these." "What are they?" Ethan asked. "The deed to a house," she said, "a house we are never going back to." But she did not burn them that afternoon. She sat down at the kitchen table instead, and for the first time in Ethan's memory, she told him about the house on the river. The property deed, the old Victorian sitting at the edge of the Allegheny Forest, perched above the water like something that had been watching the trees for a very long time. How beautiful it had been, how quickly they had bought it, how in the first weeks it had felt like the beginning of everything they had ever wanted. And then she told him about the painting. It had been hanging in the front hallway when they purchased the house. Dark oils on a cracked wooden frame, a landscape scene that looked almost right, almost normal, except the shadows in the trees were shaped wrong. Margaret had found it unsettling from the first day. One weekend, while Gerald was working in the yard, she lifted it off the hook and carried it to the trash pile outside. The moment the frame hit the ground, the sound inside the house changed. It was not a loud sound. It was the opposite of a loud sound. It was the sudden, complete absence of every ambient noise. No birds, no wind, no river. Replaced by a low vibration that Margaret felt in her teeth rather than her ears. Then the walls cracked. 3 lines simultaneously from floor to ceiling in the front hallway. And from those cracks, something dark and slow began to seep downward. Gerald came inside at the sound of Margaret screaming. By the time they both reached the front door, the papers from the cabinet were spinning in the air above their heads. They left that night. Margaret grabbed the property deed on instinct as they ran. She could not explain why, even now. And they never went back. Ethan listened to all of it without moving. That night at his office desk, he could not focus on a single spreadsheet. His supervisor's name was Victor Hale. Victor was not like other men in that office. He was precise in a way that went beyond professionalism, and he read things, strange books, old texts that he kept in a locked drawer and never discussed unless someone asked. And even then, he said very little. When Victor noticed Ethan struggling during their afternoon meeting, he asked, and Ethan, for reasons he could not fully articulate later, told him everything. Victor listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, Victor was quiet for a long moment. "The painting," Victor said finally. "Everything begins and ends with the painting." He told Ethan he had studied such things for years, what he called the mechanics of bound energy. He said that certain objects could be used as containers, that a skilled enough person could trap something inside a physical frame and hold it there, provided the frame remained intact. He said he wanted to help. Ethan should have noticed something then, a small detail, barely visible, the way Victor's eyes did not quite track with the rest of his expression when he said the word help, like the word was a costume the face was wearing. But Ethan did not notice. He was grateful. He was relieved. His mother begged him not to go. She had spent decades making certain no one in her family went anywhere near that place again, and now here was her son packing a bag with a man she had only heard of and driving toward the Allegheny forest at dawn. She handed Victor the property deed when he asked for it. She did not know what else to do. Her hands were shaking. Victor placed an amulet around Ethan's neck and one around his own. He said it would protect them from outside influence for 48 hours. He said it would keep them awake. They arrived at the house after 7 hours of driving. The front door blew open before they touched it. Inside, darkness so complete it felt like a material, like something you could cut through if you had the right tool. Victor lit candles from his bag, large, slow-burning candles that gave off a smell like cedar and something underneath cedar that Ethan could not name. They heard the first voice almost immediately. It came from the direction of the staircase, and it was not a voice so much as the shape of one, a hollow, resonant vibration that formed words without any of the softness of a human throat. You cannot hold a light in a room that does not want one. They kept moving. 24 hours passed. They searched every room, every closet, every crawl space. Nothing. The forces in the house grew louder as the night wore on. Shapes at the edge of candlelight, sounds with no sources, a low pressure behind the eyes that felt like something trying to read your thoughts from the inside. "You are not going to find it," Ethan said. He slammed his foot against the floor out of frustration. The floor gave way. 3 inches down, buried beneath decades of sealed wood, was the painting. They pulled it out. It was heavier than it looked. Victor examined it in the candlelight for a long time. Then he told Ethan what it meant. The house had originally been a gathering place. 140 years ago, a group of men had used it to practice something that had no clean English word: a systematic accumulation of will, of dark intention, structured like a science. They had grown powerful enough to frighten the surrounding communities. The local minister and 3 other men had burned the property to the ground with everyone inside it. But before the fire, a scholar, the minister's teacher, had made the painting. He had gathered the ash and pressed into it a complete record of what had lived in that place. And then he had sealed it inside a wooden frame and buried it where the foundation of a new house would be built directly above it. As long as the frame held, nothing could leave. Margaret had broken the frame when she threw it in the trash. "So what do we do?" Ethan asked. Victor said the frame had to be rebuilt from the wood of the same tree used in the original. There was such a tree still standing, he believed, somewhere in the forest. Ethan would need to find it while Victor prepared the ritual space. Ethan went into the forest alone. The forces followed him immediately. They created images in the dark, open pits that appeared in his path and vanished when he stepped around them. Sounds like voices calling his name from directions that kept shifting. A cold that pressed against the back of his neck like a hand that was almost touching him. He kept walking. 6 hours in, he was beginning to lose hope when he saw, half hidden in a cluster of white birch trees, a small stone structure. Too small to be a building, too deliberate to be ruin. A chapel, perhaps, or something older than a chapel. He stepped inside. An old man was sitting in the corner, not sitting the way people sit when they are tired, sitting the way people sit when they have been waiting for a very long time and are not surprised that you finally arrived. "I know why you've come," the old man said. He led Ethan to a tree at the edge of the clearing. He gave him an axe. As soon as Ethan cut the wood he needed, the tree was gone. Not fallen, not standing, simply absent, as though it had completed its purpose. The old man gave Ethan a sequence of words to repeat. He said they would return him to the house immediately. Ethan repeated them. He was standing in the bungalow's front hallway before he finished the last syllable. Victor built the frame quickly. His hands moved with a precision that seemed practiced in a way that had nothing to do with carpentry. As the frame came together, the sounds in the house became unbearable, not frightening exactly, but desperate, a frequency of pure panic that pressed against every surface. Objects flew from shelves, candles guttered and held. The ritual fire Victor had built in the center of the room through enormous shadows that moved independently of the flames. The lockets had less than 30 minutes of power remaining. Victor finished the frame. He lifted the painting from its broken original border and set it into the new wood. Then he placed it at the center of the altar he had built. He lit the offering fire. He began to chant. And as the smoke rose and the words continued, something remarkable happened. The darkness in the room began to collapse inward, not dramatically, not loudly, slowly, like a tide going out. The pressure and the cold and the shapes at the edge of sight all began to recede, pulling toward the painting like smoke drawn toward an open window. Within minutes, the room was quiet. Ethan exhaled for what felt like the first time in 2 days. He crossed the room and embraced Victor, and Victor accepted the embrace. And then Victor stepped back and looked at Ethan with an expression that had changed in a way Ethan did not immediately understand. "There is one task remaining, and it belongs to me alone." He reached into his bag and removed a length of rope. Ethan did not process what was happening until his arms were already bound behind him. Victor set the property deed beside the altar fire and turned to face Ethan with eyes that had gone the color of old wood. "I was there the night that house burned." He was not human. He had never been human. Or rather, he had once been human in the way that a word can be human before it is carved into stone. What remained of the man who had built that gathering place 140 years ago had survived the fire by absence. He had been away that night, and he had spent the decades since waiting, wearing faces, learning patience, working his way into positions close to the families connected to the property. He had been Ethan's supervisor for 3 years. He had waited for Ethan to grow up. He had given Ethan a job. Ethan understood then that every reasonable decision he had made, trusting Victor, accepting help, coming to this house, had been a thread in a web he had never seen. He closed his eyes. He thought of his father. He thought of his mother at the kitchen table, hands shaking over a property deed she should have burned years ago. He waited. The old man from the forest walked through the front door. He did not knock. He did not open it. He simply arrived. With one motion, his bonds fell away. With another, Victor was held where he stood, suspended, rigid, the arrogance draining from his face as he understood what was happening. The old man said nothing at first. Then he opened his fist, a handful of ash, white as chalk. He threw it. Victor did not fall. He did not scream. He simply stopped, mid-breath, mid-thought, and then he was not there anymore. The painting went with him. The altar fire died without smoke. Sunlight came through the windows. Not the gray winter light of a haunted place, true light, gold and specific, falling in rectangles across a floor that had not seen it in a century. The old man blessed Ethan and told him to bring his parents home. He said the house was clean. He said his father would begin to improve once he returned to the place where the damage had begun, that some wounds can only be healed in the room where they were first opened. Then he was gone. Ethan drove back to Columbus in the early morning hours and sat in the parking lot of his apartment building until the sun was fully up. He was not sure how to explain what he had witnessed. He was not sure the language existed. His mother met him at the door. She had not slept. She took one look at his face and started crying, not out of fear, but out of something older than fear. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that something that had been broken for a very long time was finally, carefully beginning to close. His father improved, not immediately, not all at once, but in the months that followed, after the three of them returned to the house on the river, after the windows were opened and the rooms were aired out, and his father walked through each one slowly with his hand trailing along the walls, something in Gerald Calloway began to return. A steadiness, a presence. The fog that had lived behind his eyes for 20 years started to lift at the edges. The house is theirs again now. It stands on the river where it always has, and in the mornings, the water catches the light in a way that makes it look like something from a painting. But there is no painting inside. There never will be again. I think about this story when I think about the things we carry without understanding why, the documents we keep, the objects we hold onto from moments we would rather forget, the habits of the past that travel forward with us like passengers we did not invite. Margaret Calloway grabbed that property deed on the night she ran from the house in terror. She did not know why. Some part of her, beneath fear and reason, held on. Sometimes that is all survival is. Holding on to something you cannot explain in a moment when everything is telling you to let go, because something deep and wordless inside you knows it is not finished yet. The horror ends, but what comes after, that is where the real story lives. Some doors, once opened, change the shape of every room around them, even after they close. After the horror, we begin where the story should have ended.